The Kupferstichkabinett, the Prints collection of Staatliche Kunstsammlungen Dresden, holds an extensive collection of Asian and European chinoiserie prints, mainly acquired in the beginning of the 18th century by Saxon Elector and King of Poland Augustus the Strong. This body of works is documented and described in the first inventory of the Kupferstichkabinett, dated 1738. About 75% of this collection have survived and allow meaningful conclusions to be drawn about the history of collecting and usage. Remarkably, there was no separation between works of Asian provenance and pseudo-Asian European works. Some 50 bound albums contain approximately 2,500 glued-in drawings, watercolors and prints, as well as several scrolls and individual sheets. About 1,200 Chinese, 400 Indian, and a few Japanese and Siamese sheets were kept together with 850 German and Dutch chinoiserie works in a cabinet entitled La Chine. Both the unrivaled quality and quantity, as well as the collection's coherence, provide fundamental insight into the early modern understanding of Asia. The example of the Saxon court allows us to trace how Chinese artworks were received in Europe and how a Western image of China formed and manifested itself. From 2014 to 2017, this group of work was investigated systematically in a research project supported by the Museum and Research Foundation, a parallel project to the research of the Indian miniatures and the Oriental porcelains. Under my direction, a detailed collection catalogue was compiled. Unfortunately, we still need financing for its publication. The Chinese works have been researched by my colleague Anita Xiaoming Wang, who came to Dresden funded by a Humboldt Research Fellowship for postdoctoral researchers. Therefore, she will start by characterizing the Chinese works and tracing their way from China to Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction from my colleague Cordula. And today I'm going to introduce the highlights, some of the collections of the Chinese paintings and the prints by Augustus the Strong. And on Friday, if you have booked the tour to the Kupferstichkabinett archive room, and we're going to show you more collections there. The Kupferstichkabinnett's Chinese collection contains almost 1,200 artworks, many of which are exceptional in items of their quality and historical significance. All of the items were entered into the original inventory of the collection in 1738, which in itself is extremely useful for dating the item. Pieces in the collection range from examples of elite art to popular artworks. Included in the collection is the only extant, complete version of the 36 views of the Summer Palace in Zhehe, printed from copper plates produced by Matthew Ripper in 1713, who was sent by the Italian congregation as a missionary to China. He served as an imperial artist for the Emperor Kangxi between 1710 to 1723. He was the first person who brought the copper engraving technique to Chinese imperial court. In April 1714, based on original paintings and woodblock prints, Ripper experimented and completed copper engravings. The Emperor Kangxi highly appreciated his works and ordered the edition of 70 copies, and which he gifted to royal family members and nobles. At the same time, Ripper began to send sets of his engravings to his European friends and correspondents. When Matthew Ripper returned to Europe in 1724, he brought back a number of copies of the prints. and they were probably once now found in various collections in Europe. The Dresden collection is considered the most complete series. The prints were bound in an accurate sequence. On most of the pages, the Chinese titles for each view are clearly printed. The Chinese name Zhang Kui, which we can see here, was printed on 9 of the pages. He was one of the students of Ripa from 1712 to 1714. The album also contains inscriptions, which we can see here. The inscriptions on each cover page written in French, translated from Ripa's Latin description, describing the usage of each building in the Summer Palace. The album is a good example of a transcultural subject showing the Chinese emperor's interest in European printing techniques and the idea of Chinese royal garden presentation. Before Father Ripa returned to Naples, he stopped in London, where he presented a copy to King George I, and this action probably enhanced the British and other European countries' growing interest in Chinese gardening in the 18th century. And next is the popular woodblock prints production in Suzhou. Most of the collections in Dresden are popular paintings and prints which would have been seen and bought by ordinary people in China. From the middle of the 17th century onwards, print studios and shops in Suzhou created innumerous color prints. And Taohuawu Avenue in Suzhou was a bustling commercial area in the city, where local citizens, merchants from other cities, and foreign traders from abroad gathered to do business. Most Suzhou print shops were located on this street, and the Dresden Kunststück Cabinet possesses 4 prints, which are amongst the oldest extant woodblock prints produced in the print shops on Taohuawu Avenue. One print from the collection is entitled Pictures of Wonderful Views from Past and Present, 金谷奇观图, produced prior to 1738, has a print shop signature on the bottom left, which reads 姑苏北寺前吕云台发行, meaning in front of Beisi Temple in Suzhou, published by 吕云台. Beisi, meaning North Temple, is located at the end of Taohuawu Avenue. Here's one of the prints from the 18th century from Suzhou, now in the Yumimori Museum collection of Japan, shows the location of Taohuawu and Beisi Temple, which we can see here is a very small character, Beisi. And now we can assume this is the street of Taohuawu and the woodblock prints located. Woodblock prints in the 17th century were often a part of the story or opera scenes, which often combined depictions from different elements of book illustrations. An example can be found in a woodblock print entitled Pan'an Zhiguo, meaning throwing fruits to Pan'an, which is based on an illustration from a novel published in 1624. And in the novel, Pan'an was described as a very good-looking man who women attracted to, that they threw fruits into his cart to show their affection. So in this print, there's a young woman, which you can see here. A young woman on the right and accompanied by her female attendant, and she's looking at the young man, Pan'an, who is sitting in a wheeled cart. And there's a fruit in the air, is thrown by the lady. So this print shows the same story in the novel, but a combination of the book illustrations from 2 different publications. So we can see the image of Pan'an from the original book illustration, and also 2 other figures from other publication, which is the very familiar one, the drama West Champa, 西厢记. And here is a similar image of the story scene found in our porcelain collection in Dresden. So this is the two illustrations, and now it's the porcelain. Here we can see it's a very more close image to the original book illustration, and the fruits have been thrown everywhere by all the ladies. Another print from our collection is a Chinese opera scene, 游园, Pleasure in the Garden, from the opera Peony Pavilion, 牡丹亭. The opera described the female character Du Linyang and having a walk in the garden and falling asleep in the Peony Pavilion. And during the time she was asleep, she was taken under the power of the god of dreams, who created a dream for her in which she met a young scholar and fell in love with him. And the print here depicts the scene of Du Linyang's walking in the garden in her real life, and that is also her in her dream with the scholar. And on the right side, the man with the beard holding a pair of mirrors, and that is the dream, the god dream, and who controls the dreams for human beings. And the opera is very popular in Chinese culture, and is still now performed on the stage as a kunqu. So now we can see in the print, and the Chinese word for opera scene, 游园, is printed on the top right of the print, and next to it are characters 十美图, meaning the picture of 10 beauties, which indicates the title of a series of 10 pictures containing 10 beautiful figures. The Pandan in previous print and the female figure Du Linyang in this print are possibly two of them. Apart from the Dresden's collection, other prints of this kind are found in Sir Hans Sloane's collection in the British Museum. Hans Sloane was an Irish physician and a naturalist, and became a secretary to the Royal Society in 1693. He bought about 70 pieces of Chinese popular prints from James Pettiver, and who received them from James Cunningham, a Scottish botanist, visited to China in Amoy. Amoy is the name of Xiamen. And from 1698 to 1699. And in Zhoushan, Zhoushan, between 1700 and 1702. And he traveled through one of two private ships, and trading ships to Amoy. And during a 6-month stay in Amoy and 2 years in Zhoushan, Cunningham collected large numbers of specimens of plants and animals, also commissioned nearly 800 paintings and prints from Chinese artists for Pettiver and Sir Hans Sloane. So the British Museum prints of opera scenes display the same printing style with the Dresden ones, which we can see here. These are the collections from the British Museum, and those the 3 from Dresden collection. So in terms of the size, color, and background depictions, some of them are very likely belong to the series entitled 10 Beauties from the same workshop in 17th century Suzhou area. An edition of the Romance of the West Chamber, 西厢记, contains illustrations produced by Min Qiji, published in 1640, now in the collection of the Museum for East Asian Art, Cologne. The prints were produced using several sets of separate color blocks. The technique is so-called multi-block color printing. Each print contains 5 to 6 different colors, and these illustrations are very similar in technique and color scheme to the 10 Beauties prints in both the British Museum and the Dresden collections, which indicates the production date is possibly from 1640s to 1700. Chinese popular art influence in chivalry. So from the end of the 16th century, the Age of Discovery initiated frequent communications between Europe and East Asia. In 1685, Emperor Kangxi gave an edict to open the ocean trade in 4 Chinese eastern ports. And traditionally, the Chinese prints from Suzhou are known to have purchased by European merchants, travelers, and Jesuits through East Indian Company vessels, and even some company staff through private trade. And after they were transported, and they were sold in Europe by European merchants at different auctions. And those popular artworks with exotic Eastern figures and motifs aroused a strong interest in European people for Chinese aesthetic styles. So in the first stage of chivalry production, exact copies of these prints were produced by European artists. And this print depicts an opera scene entitled Kunlun Slave Steals Hongxiao. It's a classic story about a young man's family slave, Kunlun, which we can see here, and beat a fierce dog from a governor's house. He went to help a young scholar and a female singer go on a date together. So the slave was described as a dark-skinned man, and compared with other figures, his cheeks have been painted with a reddish color, which we can see here. So a copy of this image of Kunlun beating a dog appears on the wall as a wooden lacquer inner decoration in the Villanov Palace in Warsaw, Poland, which we can see here. And again, we see another example of a drama scene from West Champa in the middle here, and then also a copy of a male figure can be found in the same wooden wall decoration in Villanov Palace. And even more similar image can be found on a piece of lacquerware in the Museum of Budapest. The distinctly Chinese style displayed in these prints had a great influence on the work of European artists who produced chivalry artworks that were sometimes direct copies of Chinese motifs and sometimes inspired by them. A very special print in our collection which depicts a table, which we can see here, and divided into 48 small rectangles. Each one has a depiction of human figures from 48 different countries. At the top of each box is the name of the country where each figure is from and a short description text in Chinese characters of each country, which we can see here. Most of the text and images come from an ancient illustration book called 异域图志, translated as Pictures and Descriptions of Foreign Lands, published in 1489. There is a copy can be found now in the collection of Cambridge Library. The book contained 158 figures from different countries, mainly in China, but also including a few from European countries, which we can see here is Helanguo, that is the depiction of people from Holland, and some imaginary countries as well. So the depiction above each figure contains information about the appearance of the inhabitants, people's living and dietary habits, their special products and the local customs, as well as the geographic location of each country to Beijing and Nanjing. The print was used as a copy, as an example of chivalry artworks by artists in the Saxon court in the 18th century. As in the same album, a few watercolor paintings are found in European paper with the same copies of 7 human figures in the print. There's no clear sign why those countries were chosen. They were possibly just selected by the artist based on his own taste or preference. However, two of these copies are of original images which have not yet been found. So I believe that there was another similar print with different figures which has gone missing. The influence of Chinese art on the work of European artists producing chivalry was clear, but so too was the influence from Europe on China. From 1700, Suzhou woodblock prints appeared with a clear European influence. They became popular Chinese products in the domestic market in Europe and in Japan. However, they were only produced for a short period of time, roughly from the 1700s to 1760s, and their emergence and disappearance was related to Catholicism in China. It was not until 1695 that Kangxi Emperor himself formally permitted the Jesuits to settle in China. With the emperor's positive attitude towards the Jesuits, the political environment created a good opportunity for the spread of Catholicism in China. And during this time, the number of Catholic and converts increased in southeast China. A case can be made that there are 4 extant Suzhou prints in the Dresden collections with linear perspective, which were produced in between 1710 to 1720s, which indicates that Suzhou prints, which indicates that the political environment had been more favorable to Jesuits and their fellows. And on the top left of one of the print, and the name Yuntai is visible. This name refers to Ding Yuntai, a popular artist born from Hangzhou. The other characters on the print, Xin Tian Weng, Yuntai Zhibi. The character Weng refers to an elderly man, Xin Tian, which means follower of or believer in Catholicism. In a book which was written by a Chinese Catholic in 1711, Ding Yuntai was mentioned, born with a Catholic family background, who contributed to the Christian community in China. In addition, the print to the right has the inscription Team Polo written in Western script, and this may refer to the baptismal name of Ding Yuntai received. This direct connection is shown between what is most probably the earliest known single-sheet Suzhou print with linear perspective and the Jesuit influence. Another print in the Dresden collection, printed in Suzhou, was a Chinese version of Madonna and the Child. This print does not contain any linear perspective, but it does include the European technique of hatching lines, which we can see on the clothes. The long nose of the woman, the eye shape, and the curly hairstyle of the boy, as well as their arms and hands, are clearly influenced by European painting techniques. However, there are clues which strongly suggest that the print was produced by a Suzhou local artist. Looking closely at the woman's mouth shape influenced from Chinese methods of depicting the mouth can be seen. The print patterns on the edge of a woman's dress, which we can see here, and it's entitled Chrysanthemum and Surrounding Stems, is a popular motif found in Suzhou print. The jade patterns worn on her red belt and the depiction of the basket are in keeping with the style of a Suzhou print. The print combines the Chinese traditional theme of mother and son with elements of European Catholic images of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. A hanging scroll entitled The Mysterious Madonna and Child, collected by Berthold Laufer in Chicago Field Museum, which has been dated to the 17th century, when Jesuit missionaries were in China, which shows that this theme may have appeared in Chinese visual culture by that time. From the 1720s until the 1770s, Suzhou prints with beautiful women figures and European techniques became particularly fashionable. Such artworks in Europe were often used as wallpaper in castles, palaces, and stately homes. One print with a beauty figure in the Dresden collection depicts the shadows, which we can see here, and in the form of black lines on the clothes and the furniture, showing the influence of European art techniques. The print was printed and hand-painted on Chinese paper, then it was mounted on the canvas, which is here, on the back of the paper. And the print, which seems to have been preparatory work for the purpose of producing wallpaper. And this was also known as a method of attachment to the wall in the 18th century Europe. It is believed that this print was pasted to the canvas somewhere in Europe before being shipped to Dresden. And some similar examples can be found in the wallpaper in Schloss Lichtenweide, Schloss Wörlitz, Schloss Nymphenburg, and Esterhazy Castle in Austria. Not only woodblock prints, but also Chinese watercolor paintings were appreciated by European market. A painting scroll in the collection of the Conference Cabinet is painted on silk. And this hand scroll is dated from the early to mid 17th century, especially depicts the story scenes of the Ming novel Water Margin. The novel is described about 108 characters as heroes who gathered and revolted in a place called Liangshan Marsh. There are 65 sections in this scroll, are all the same depictions found in the edition of the Ming Dynasty, which contains 100 chapters with 200 illustrations, published between 1573 to 1620. The scroll presents depictions from the right to the left side, and each part is exactly copied from the illustrations in this novel, and also followed the sequence of the chapters up until 40 chapters, and which indicates there's another scroll with the rest of the chapters existed but not yet found. The scroll has no inscriptions or signatures, which indicates the paintings were produced by an unknown artist. The same long scroll contains almost the same depiction of the water margin scenes as found in the museum in Braunschweig, and which was previously cut into pieces and installed as inner wallpaper. The two similar depictions and the same painting style indicate, and they were possibly created by the same artist. As well as the art pieces from Suzhou, the Dresden collection also contains pieces made in Guangzhou. In the album, depictions of daily life activities are quite realistic and accurate, and thus allowed people outside of China to learn about the local Chinese traditions in the 17th and 18th centuries. There seems to be a purpose of showing a clear vision of Chinese life to the European audience. And this painting depicts, we can see here, it depicts a detailed scene of a rich Chinese family's wedding ceremony, which we can see the bride is sitting in the carriage, and following with the ceremony team and going here to marry to her husband, which is in the middle here. And the similar depictions can be found in some 19th century watercolor paintings of everyday life on rice paper, which were mainly produced in the area called Hongs in Guangzhou. The Hongs are known as Shisanhang in Chinese, a title for a business organization managing foreign trade for the Qing government in Guangdong. Officially founded in 1686, which shows the album is possibly one of the earliest collections of the large-sized Chinese watercolor paintings for exported aims. And the album has remarkable significance and value as an artwork recording the history of the customs of South China and produced as exported artworks to Europe in the early 18th century. The paintings also show that the artist copied and was inspired by the images from the illustrations in the book by Johann Neuhoff, containing the written account of his journey from Guangdong to Beijing in China between 1655 to 1657. Okay, you can see here is the copy of Johann Neuhoff's illustration. So with the popularity of Chinese motifs, demand for Chinese art increased in European market. An album includes 189 watercolor paintings of human figures, flowers and birds, landscapes and animals with Western color materials and paper, but in traditional Chinese compositions and techniques. And 24 paintings all include the seals and the calligraphy of the name of an unknown artist, Lin Bing, which we can see here, the seal and also the inscription. The most important information is contained in two paintings on which the artist has written Chinese calligraphy at the top of the paintings. And the inscription refers to a date which indicates that this album was produced in the year 1700. The style of the paintings indicates the artist Lin Bing was based possibly in Guangzhou during the late 17th century. He used European painting materials to produce Chinese art for the Western market. And it is possible that the album was a sample book to show Chinese art motifs for specific orders for Europe for the products like glass paintings or watercolor wallpapers. So in conclusion, the above selected items from the collections of the Converse cabinet provide rich evidence of the artistic and cultural exchange between China and Europe during the 17th to 18th centuries. The Chinese original artworks, rooted in Chinese literature, culture, and customs, were popular art products, mostly produced for the domestic markets. In Europe, some of these original Chinese prints were directly copied, whilst some chinoiserie works borrowed elements from the original motifs to form new graphic images. In Suzhou and Guangzhou, some prints and paintings were employed. European art techniques emerged and displayed the influence of European artistic techniques, but rather than being copies, the new techniques were generally used to enhance the portrayal of the traditional subjects. Now I'll give the time to my colleague Cordula Bischoff to introduce the collections from Europe to Dresden. Thank you.
Just like the porcelains, Asian paintings, books and drawings were purchased from about 1715, mainly in the 1720s. Dresden State Archive keeps the accounts of Augustus the Strong's personal expenses until the year 1718. The records from later years are lost. Therefore, a systematic history of acquisitions is not possible. Nevertheless, some perceptions could be gained concerning Augustus' buying opportunities, and in some cases it is possible to reconstruct the exact circumstances. Primarily, there were three possibilities of acquisition: the purchase in the Netherlands, performed by agents; the purchase at the Leipzig trade fair and from specialized dealers; and to a lesser extent, diplomatic gifts from nobles. In the run-up to the furnishing of the Japanese palace, Augustus took advantage of using one of his courtiers as agent in search of Asian objects. And we have heard already the story of Lanyasco, so I can omit the similar foil and can directly go on to the next. Most of his acquisitions of most of Lanyasco's acquisitions were porcelains, of course. But all other Asian objects that were necessary to furnish chinoiserie rooms came into consideration too. Lanyasco corroborated his acquisition proposals with ideas on how to combine the objects later in interior design. We heard that already too. And he often recommended to buy textiles and other objects matching the porcelains he had purchased already before. For instance, he was really delighted by a set of canvas hangings painted with flowers and animals, called in French tapisserie de toile peinte descente, of which he reported that he had never seen such a beautiful piece in his life. The price was 2,600 Reichsthaler, and he offered to take the set for himself if Augustus wanted to withdraw. But Augustus agreed, and on September 8th, in 1716, he bought the series of 163 sheets with colored flowers and birds painted on gold ground. They had been delivered on October 5th to Van den Bempten by the widow Godefroy, a female trader who is often mentioned. Their size of 4 cubits, about 2 meter to 2 meter 20, brings Chinese scrolls to mind, which have been frequently used in the beginning of the 18th century as wall hangings. An almost contemporaneous comparable example can be seen in Pagodenburg Pavilion in Munich, accomplished in 1722. The purchases list some Asian paintings, prints and books, but the descriptions are vague and cannot be assigned to the preserved works. Mentioned are, for example, one Japanese almanac and an almanac from India, both acquired for the sum of 100 guilders, and also a group of drawings on paper depicting grotesque Indian figures. Several times, series of small portraits at advantageous prices were bought. Once, 195 pieces for 58 guilders, and then 200 pieces for 150 guilders. A bit more expensive were 12 small portraits from India for 80 guilders, acquired on May 15, 1717 at Saint-Jean-Martin in The Hague. Possibly they can be identified with those 12 oval portraits that can be found today in an album together with 60 other bigger representations of Indian rulers. This album was purchased only in 1728, so much later, at the Amsterdam auction of Nicholas Witsen's estate. But in the auction catalogue, only 60 portraits are mentioned. So it is likely that the 12 smaller ones, the oval ones, from 1717 have later been added in Dresden to this album. At the same day and from the same dealer, a Chinese scroll was bought, which is mentioned in 3 different accounts. A piece with a length of 13 cubits and a big number of Indian figures. Une pièce de 13 ans de long sur laquelle il y a un grand nombre de figures indiennes. 13 Saxon cubits equate to 7 meter 36. This scroll seems to be lost. In the end of 1716, Augustus had plans to buy his own ship or to charter one to sail to East Asia, a request which of course was rejected by VOC. Instead, he was granted to send his own emissary on board of a VOC vessel to Asia. He would be allowed to purchase all sorts of things except spices. On December 23rd, 1716, Augustus informed Lanyasco that he wanted to send a delegation to Asia. Thereupon Laniasco developed in January 1717 a detailed plan on the realization of the expedition. He recommended to send at least 4 persons, as in the course of the long journey, illness or even death must be expected. Besides, it would be reasonable to split up on site. 1 person could travel to China, 1 to Japan, and a 3rd to India. Obviously, the aim was to get goods produced according to Augustus' own needs. For 1 person of the emissary definitely should be capable to make models and drawings from the desired objects, or else the Asian people were incapable of supplying satisfactorily. The journey should have started in April 1717, at the same time as the acquisition of the Japanese palace. Why it was not performed remains unknown. In 1728, the estate of Nicholas Wietzen, who had died in 1717, was auctioned off. Being a politician, diplomat, burgomaster of Amsterdam and administrator of the Dutch East India Company, he had established one of the most important collections of East Asian artworks and rarities. Augustus the Strong seized the opportunity to make a bulk purchase through an unknown intermediary. He bought at least 20 still verifiable works from India, Thailand, and China. The numbers and titles mentioned in the auction catalogue of several works have been inserted in the Dresden inventory of 1738. In Cabinet 2, Natural History, we find 2 scientific albums whose origin is noted down beyond doubt. 1 precious animal book painted from Batavia, number 5, from Burgomaster Wietzen's auction in Amsterdam, folio, and 1 thick tome of Chinese paper with painted drawings of several kinds of Chinese animals, number 2, from Burgomaster Wietzen's auction in Amsterdam. So this is the entry in the inventory of the Kupferstichkabinett. From these entries, we can conclude that the mentioned numbers 2 and 5 refer to the auction catalogue. Both volumes have comments by Wietzen's own hand on the flyleaf, noting that they are his commissioned works. This is the second one, so we have the same situation, entry in the inventory and the same number in the auction catalogue, and this is the handwritten remark by Wietzen. A 3rd similar work, 3 volumes depicting plants in Batavia and also signed by Wietzen, today are kept in Dresden State and University Library. By comparing the numbers and letters of the auction catalogue with numbers still visible on the objects or mentioned in the inventory, quite a few works could be identified as purchases from this auction. In order to illustrate the range of the acquisitions, some of them shall be mentioned very briefly. Among other things, Augustus bought volumes with Indian Mogul portraits, a set of Indian playing cards, and a booklet of costumed figures from Constantinople. A Siamese scroll with a detailed depiction of the funeral of Siamese King Petrarca. The scroll was painted in 1704 by order of Arnold Kleur, governor of East Indian Company in Ayutthaya. This scroll is, according to Thai expert Jan Barend Terwil, the earliest known Siamese large-sized drawing. A long drawing in several parts with a view of Maidan in Isfahan, made in 1704 or 5, most probably by Cornelis de Bruyn. August also purchased several maps of Japan. Works of Chinese origin are a volume with 9 landscapes painted on silk and a scroll depicting scenes from the novel Water Margin, both from late Ming dynasty. Some works today are lost and only tangible by those 2 sources, the auction catalogue and the inventory book. There must have been 2 more scrolls with many figures, because number 47 in the inventory mentions 1 landscape one landscape from China, number 1, which corresponds to the auction catalogue, number 1, a large scroll painted in colors. It is a landscape in China with many figures, some cubits long. Number 40 in the inventory is described as one Japanese landscape painted in oil color, number 2, which in the Whitson catalogue is number 2, one ditto, meaning one landscape. It is the depiction of a Japanese matsuri or funfair with many figures lying in a box of cedar wood. Besides direct purchase in the Netherlands, especially the Leipzig Trade Fair provided an opportunity to obtain Asian objects. It is documented that Augustus the Strong visited the fairs at least 30 times. In several of his personal bills is listed specification of fancy goods that His Royal Majesty of Poland and His Serene Highness Elector of Saxony has received to his own high hands and thus negotiated by himself. The fair took place 3 times a year and lasted for 2 weeks. Since 1710, it had evolved into the most important trade fair of Germany and into one of the leading trading venues of Europe. Leipzig had the most modern trade laws and served all major exchange markets of Northwest Europe and South Germany. The big seaports, Amsterdam and Hamburg, delivered their goods via the Elbe River to the city Magdeburg, which lies 100 kilometers north of Leipzig. Well-developed roads connected the major north-south and west-east routes with Leipzig at their crossing point. Particularly the trade with eastern countries like Poland, Bohemia, Hungary, Transylvania, Silesia, and via intermediaries with Russia was completed almost exclusively in Leipzig. Likewise, 3/4 of all imported English commodities passed the Saxon commercial metropolis. At the same time, Leipzig took the primacy in German book printing and book trade. All well-known publishers distributed their products in Leipzig. No wonder that most of the chinoiserie prints produced mainly in South German and printing centers Augsburg and Nuremberg were also sold in large quantities at the Leipzig fair. The Leipzig engraver and publisher Johann Joachim Püschel made in 1710, as can be seen from the inscriptions, a series from cut-out sheets with chinoiserie motifs. They were produced specially for this fair and were continued until 1711. The sheets of all 3 series were enumerated consecutively from 1 to 18 to fulfill the customer's need to collect matching series. The Saxon court was close to the source and was able to stock up on novelties of the printing sector. So the collection of the Kupferstichkabinett contains about 850 of such chinoiserie popular prints, partly in multiple copies, colored or plain, and all of them in matching series. This genre only emerged in about 1700, 1710, and was soon sold in enormous quantities. The sheets were used by professional artists and by amateurs as patterns for interior decoration and as cutouts for lacquer povera, a popular kind of lacquerware, pasting the cutout motifs on small furniture and varnishing them. This is an example where some of the motifs were used as model for a wallpaper, and this is a typical object in lacquer povera technique. The 1721 inventory of the porcelain collection dedicates a separate chapter to Indian pasted things, that is cardboard boxes decorated with colored engravings, faking lacquerware. So objects in this technique, smaller objects, mainly boxes and small screens. Hardly any of these engravers knew or followed original Asian paintings or prints. Mostly they used as sources the illustrations of the well-known travelogues of Neuhoff, Kircher, Montanus, Stapper, Schoten and de Vries. The only exception are father and son Peter Schenk, engravers, map publishers and art dealers from Amsterdam. In 1702, Schenk the Elder copied in his series Picturae Sinicae Axuratene colored woodcuts from Kangxi period. He adopted the form of the medallions and the Chinese inscriptions and copied the lettering as precisely that it is even possible to decipher them. We do not know the exact model, but it might resemble one of the prints of the Dresden collection. Schenk the Younger copied the prints of his father, but also made his own prints using other Chinese works. In the collection of the Rijksmuseum Amsterdam, we find a series of 6 Chinese ladies. One of them is a copy after an original Chinese woodcut in the Dresden collection, which exists in 2 exemplaries. So this is the original Chinese print in Amsterdam, and this is, or those 2 are the Chinese prints we do have in Dresden. Even though the Schenk family operated their publishing house in Amsterdam, they had close connections to the Saxon court. Schenk the Elder was a royal Polish copper engraver and published topographic maps for Augustus the Strong. The son edited together with Adam Friedrich Zürner numerous Saxon special maps. During trade fair times, they, since 1700, maintained a branch office in Leipzig. It is documented that between 1710 and 1713, Schenk supplied the Saxon court annually with empty sheets of paper, copper prints, maps, portraits, and illustrated books. Most likely, it was one of the Schenks who had provided the Chinese prints. In his extensive series, Neue Inventaire des Chinesen, Schenk Jr. processed his own designs and compiled several motifs to new pictures. Both the female card player and the rabbit on the stool are copied from Chinese woodcuts. The chinoiserie engravings by Schenk father and son are among the most successful and most copied models for other artists. They played a key role in the evolution of chinoiserie style, and they promoted the Asian art at Saxon court. Most probably, the Schenks also acted as traders and sold not only their own but also Chinese prints in Leipzig. Most Asian woodcuts and paintings came to Europe as loose sheets and were sold in bundles called paquets or envelope. European graphics as well usually were bound together into albums by the buyers. The nearly 600 watercolors on silk in the same format with repetitive but varying motifs kept in 3 albums must have been placed loosely between the album's sheets over a long period. In 2 albums, the imprints on the left pages caused by the artworks and the glued-in pictures on the right pages do not match. Presumably, the pictures were meant to be mounted to wall panels or to screens, maybe as part of the interior decoration of the Japanese palace. Finally, this plan was abandoned. I think you can see that this, oops. Yep. That this imprint is not the same picture as here. And we do have this picture too in the album, but on another page. And so we have several examples of this, that they must have been lying loosely in between the sheets so that they could have been able to produce a print. Yeah, okay. The Chinese prints and paintings mainly were used as decorative elements within chinoiserie rooms. Already in Whitson's auction catalogue, 9 Chinese drawings had been advertised as bequem for ein Kammershoot, suitable for a screen. The second purpose was to serve as models for European artists. We saw that already. Saxon court lacquer master Martin Schnell copied several figures for lacquer furniture, and also for interior of Polish castle Wilanów. An unknown Dresden court artist used a popular woodblock print, we saw that already, and copied and enlarged some of the figures. In the Chinese prints, The size of the figures is about 7 centimeters, whereas the format of the copies vary between 50 and 60 centimeters. The size and the bold painting style suggest a use as ephemeral theater or festive decoration. Interestingly, original work and copies are kept in the same volume. Some Chinese objects might have been diplomatic gifts, although there is no tangible evidence. But it seems likely that the famous volume of 36 views of the Imperial Summer Palace came as a present from some Catholic cleric to Augustus the Strong. As the Dresden copy contains a Latin description of the plates in the handwriting of Matteo Ripa, it well might be one of the copies Ripa brought back to Rome in 1724. One more circumstance indicates Augustus' diplomatic relations. In Saxon State Archive, we find a document which was formerly in possession of the Meissen porcelain manufactory. It is a handwritten copy of a report written in 1722 by Lorenz Lange, a Swedish diplomat serving Russia. He had accompanied the first 2 Russian trading caravans to China in 1715 and in 1719 and stayed as a Russian envoy in Beijing from 1720 to 22. His records from that time were published in French in 1726. But the Dresden copy is translated into German, although a German print edition has never been published. This might imply that Augustus was eager to receive first-hand information and that he used his international contacts, in this case probably with Tsar Peter I. Many thanks for your kind attention.